Hello listeners. This project is hobby of mine, so please be patient and understand that it will not be perfect and errors can happen. If you see any misalignments, please report in comment section. Chapter 2.5. Later, at the meeting spot. The shadows of the lower district deepened as Lone arrived at the designated meeting spot, a secluded corner tucked away from prying eyes. The stranger was already there, leaning casually against the wall, his arms crossed. His expression was unreadable, his presence as unnerving as ever. "You did well," the man said, his voice calm but devoid of praise. He extended a hand, and Lone hesitated for a fraction of a second before handing over the coin. The stranger pocketed it without a word, his gaze lingering on Lone. "You've got potential. But this was just the beginning. The main square isn't far, but it's a world apart. If you want to get there, if you want to achieve what you're after, you'll need to push further. Much further." Lone's jaw tightened. He'd done the job, proved himself. But the stranger's words carried a weight that made his chest tighten. This wasn't over. It was only the start of something much larger, something that would pull him deeper into a world he wasn't sure he was ready for. As the man turned to leave, Lone's mind raced. The main square, the Black Vultures. Everything he'd fought to survive for. It was all getting closer. But so was the danger. There was no turning back now. Chapter 3. A glimpse of the main square. The sun dipped low behind the crumbling rooftops of Cavanmore, casting long shadows over the narrow alleys of the lower district. Lone moved with purpose, his footsteps swift but measured, navigating through the bustling streets. The usual sense of decay and sweat mixed with the sharper tang of metal and dust, a sharp contrast to the familiar stench of refuse and open sewers. As he drew nearer, the towering stone walls that separated the destitute from the affluent loomed ahead, their cold, impregnable surface reflecting a promise of something he could never touch. The main square was just visible in the distance, a sliver of marble and stone gleaming faintly under the waning light, a world tantalizingly close, yet always out of reach. He could almost hear the distant laughter, the soft clink of gold coins changing hands, the hum of commerce, a stark contrast to the ceaseless noise of the lower district. It was a world that had everything. And he had nothing. His heart hammered in his chest, but it wasn't fear that surged within him. No, it was something sharper. Something darker. Revenge. Lone paused at the edge of a crowded street, his gaze fixed on the gates of the main square. They were colossal, framed by iron, and gleamed under the sun. Beyond them, the golden world seemed a distant dream. Guards patrolled the tops of the walls, their figures like dark sentinels against the sky. Their eyes never strayed, their hands never faltered, as if they were the ultimate authority in this world. The gates, unyielding and flawless, held back everything that Lone wanted, everything he needed. "They don't belong to me." Lone clenched his fists, his nails digging into his palms. "They have everything, and I have nothing." For a fleeting moment, he saw himself crossing that threshold, stepping into a world where wealth dictated worth, where those like him were born to serve or be discarded. But he wasn't like the others. He wasn't some beggar or lowly servant. He was Lone, and he was here for a reason. To make them pay. His gaze drifted from the gates to the towering stone walls, and for the first time, the sight of the city's wealth felt less like a dream and more like a prison. Even considering stepping foot inside felt foolish, reckless. Yet, the thought burned in his mind, relentless. What if there was a way? "What are you doing, Lone?" he muttered under his breath, his voice tight with the weight of his own doubts. "You don't belong there." But even as the words left his lips, something darker stirred inside him, an insistent whisper that gnawed at the edges of his thoughts. He wasn't some anonymous face in the crowd. He was someone. He had purpose. Lone moved toward a quieter corner, his eyes scanning the area with a practiced, calculating focus. He studied the guards' movements, their shifts, the patterns of patrols that circled the square. His sharp eyes tracked the gaps in their watch, the unnoticed spaces where shadows bent and twisted, where unseen paths beckoned. He was no stranger to evasion. He knew the city like the back of his hand, every alley, every corner, every abandoned building. There was a way in. He didn't know exactly how yet, but he could feel it. He had evaded the law for years, hidden from prying eyes, and dodged the enforcer's gaze time and again. The main square was just another challenge. A more dangerous one, perhaps. But still, just another challenge. Hours passed as Lone melted into the crowd, unseen yet keenly aware of every subtle movement around him. Nobles and merchants strolled by, oblivious to the desperate souls who watched them. He could almost smell their wealth, the scent of fine perfumes, the sharp tang of expensive leather, the gleam of gold rings and silk gowns brushing against cobblestones. They were untouchable, unfazed by the crushing weight of survival that pressed down on him every waking moment. His gaze fell on a group of young men, their tailored clothes immaculate, their laughter sharp and carefree. Pampered bastards. They had the world, and they knew it. The confidence in their eyes, an ownership of everything they surveyed, gnawed at Lone's insides. His fists tightened, the skin across his knuckles pulled taut as his mind sharpened. He returned his gaze to the guards, noting their rhythm, the almost predictable nature of their patrols. A sliver of opportunity revealed itself, a southern corner near the stables where the guards' vigilance faltered, an eastern alley where scaling the wall might provide access to a narrow ledge. It wasn't much, but it was a start. As the evening settled in and the crowd began to thin, Lone's focus remained unwavering. The fire within him burned hotter now, not just with anger, but with purpose. The Black Vultures were still far from the main square, but their influence stretched far enough to cast a long shadow over the lower district. They controlled everything here, suffocating every ounce of hope, their reach absolute. But Lone had nothing to lose. He had lived on scraps, on the fringes of a city that didn't care whether he lived or died. He would never be beholden to them. Never again. Leaning against a broken column in a dark alley, Lone closed his eyes, retreating into his memories. The sounds of the night faded, replaced by a flood of memories from years ago, a night of blood, screams, and shattered wood. His mother's voice had trembled, urging him to stay hidden under the floorboards, her hand clamped over his mouth, stifling his cries. Then came the pounding of boots, the splintering of wood, the voice of the man who haunted his every waking thought. Nothing personal, cobbler, Torin had said, a cruel, mocking laugh in his voice. Just business. The words echoed in Lone's mind, an unending refrain. It was personal. It always had been. And the moment of reckoning was fast approaching. The sound of footsteps pulled him from his thoughts. Instinctively, Lone slipped deeper into the shadows. A familiar voice rang out in the alley. Well, it's you. Lone's heart skipped a beat. He spun around, eyes narrowing as he saw the stranger, the old man who had watched him the day before. He had been expecting this, but even now, a chill crawled up his spine. What do you want? Lone demanded, his voice low but steady. The man's lips curled into a knowing smile, his eyes gleaming with something both inscrutable and unsettling. I've been watching you, he said, his voice grating. You've got fire in you. You're not like the others here. You want something. Lone narrowed his eyes, suspicion lining every feature of his face. I don't trust you. The man chuckled, his voice a rasp, like dry leaves rustling in the wind. No one does in this city. But trust me when I say you're in over your head if you think you can simply waltz into the main square and get what you want. Lone didn't flinch. His eyes narrowed further. What do you know about it? More than you think, the man replied cryptically, his gaze unwavering. There are ways in, but you'll need more than just a plan and a bit of courage to get through those gates. There's an underground network, people who can help. People like me. Lone studied him for a moment, his mind racing. Suspicion tangled with a strange curiosity. What's the catch? The man's smile faded, replaced by something colder. The catch is you'll owe me. And I don't like waiting for what's due. Lone hesitated. His mind raced, torn between the desire to seize an opportunity and the gut instinct that screamed at him to be cautious. The thought of getting inside the main square, of getting close enough to finally strike at the Black Vultures, was too tempting. But this man was dangerous. It could all be a trap. But what did Lone have to lose? I don't trust you, Lone said again, his voice hard. But I'll listen. The man's knowing chuckle echoed in the alley as he faded back into the shadows, leaving Lone alone with the weight of his decision. Chapter 4. The Price of Admission. Trigger warning. The following chapter involve explicit violence, blood, and death. Please proceed with caution if these elements are distressing. 3 days had passed since the chaotic events of the alley, and my mind hadn't stopped racing. The old man had said he'd contact me when he was ready, but the waiting gnawed at me like a rat on stale bread. I'd spent those days lurking in the shadows of the lower district, avoiding trouble and watching the main square from afar. As if just staring at it could reveal some hidden path that would bring me closer. I didn't trust him, but I couldn't afford to waste time or patience. The Black Vultures weren't going to wait for me to figure things out. When the message finally came, scrawled on a scrap of parchment and tucked into the pocket of a beggar's coat, I felt both relief and dread. The note was simple, almost too simple. Meet me at the north alley near the docks, midnight. The air in the lower district had a certain weight to it, like damp wool pressing against your skin. Even at night, the streets were alive with muffled voices and the distant clang of metal on metal. My boots barely made a sound as I weaved through the maze of alleys, heading for the meeting spot. Every step carried the nagging thought that this stranger might be leading me to my death. I stopped and gritted my teeth. Why am I even trusting him? The darkness was thick here, swallowing up the dim light from the scattered lanterns hanging from crooked iron posts. The docks, as quiet as they were, never seemed peaceful. The smell of salt and fish hung heavy in the air, mixing with the faint scent of decaying wood and rotting crates. I hated it, but it was home for tonight. When I arrived at the designated alley, he was already there, leaning casually against a crumbling brick wall. The faint glow of a lantern nearby painted his face in sharp relief, casting shadows that made him look even more dangerous than I remembered. The same dark eyes, the same unsettling smile, as if he was used to being the puppet master in a city full of pawns. You're late, he said, his tone as sharp as a blade. I'm here, aren't I? I shot back, crossing my arms. So, let's hear it. What's the job? He studied me for a moment, his gaze penetrating, as if weighing my soul. I hated that feeling, the feeling that he could see through me. Direct. I like that, but this isn't just any job. If you want my help getting into the main square, you'll need to prove yourself. He paused, eyes narrowing. There's a man named Dreger who runs a warehouse near the docks. Inside, there's a ledger. My ledger. Bring it to me, and we'll talk. Your ledger? I arched an eyebrow. What makes it so important? Details you don't need to know, he said coolly. Let's just say it contains information that could upset certain balances in this city. Dreger is keeping it for leverage, and I'd like it back. I considered his words. A ledger? Why would Dreger, some thug at the docks, have something this man wanted so badly? But I didn't question it. Not yet. And what makes you think I'm the right person for this? You're desperate, he said bluntly. Desperate people do extraordinary things. My jaw tightened. He wasn't wrong, but his arrogance grated on me. Still, I needed what he was offering. I wasn't foolish enough to walk away from a chance to get closer to the main square, closer to my goal. Fine, I said, my voice steely. I'll get your ledger, but when I do, you'd better hold up your end of the deal. The stranger smiled faintly, a predator's grin. Oh, I always keep my promises. Just don't get yourself killed, lone. That would be inconvenient. The docks were quieter than I expected, but the quiet was deceptive. Lanterns swung from posts, their dim light reflecting off the still water, and shadows shifted with every sway. The scent of brine and oil clung to the air. I crouched behind a stack of rotting crates, eyes darting from corner to corner, taking in the scene. The warehouse loomed ahead, a hulking structure of wood and stone. 2 guards stood by the main door, their postures relaxed, but their weapons were never far from reach. They spoke in low voices, their conversation drifting through the night air, punctuated by occasional laughter. I'm telling you, Vrek, the boss is gonna kill you if you cheat again, one of them said, his voice gruff but amused. Cheat? Me? You're just sore because I keep winning, the other replied with a chuckle. Besides, it's not cheating if you don't get caught. Yeah, well, don't let Dregger hear you say that. He's got eyes everywhere. Peeved, Dregger's too busy counting his coins to care. Speaking of which, you owe me a round after this shift. Their banter continued, a mix of teasing and grumbling, as I crouched in the shadows. They sounded too relaxed, too distracted. If I was careful, maybe I could slip past unnoticed. But my mind raced. This is madness. The guards weren't the only thing I had to worry about. Dregger's warehouse was a nest of rats, and if I wasn't careful, I'd become one of them, caught in a trap with no way out. I scanned the building again, my eyes narrowing. A direct approach would be suicide. But a more subtle one, that was a different story. A narrow window, high up on the side of the building, caught my attention. The glass was cracked and dirty, but it might just be the opening I needed. It took every ounce of strength to pull myself up to the window. My fingers ached from gripping the jagged edges of the stone wall, and my breath came in short, ragged gasps. The warehouse's exterior was rough, but it was sturdy enough to bear my weight. Finally, I reached the sill. I pressed my back against the wall, peering inside. The warehouse was just as I imagined, cluttered with crates and barrels, dimly lit by a handful of lanterns that flickered like dying stars. The air was thick with the scent of salt and decay, the smell of a place long forgotten by those who mattered. All right, Lone, I whispered to myself. Just get in, grab the ledger, and get out. Easy. Except nothing about this was easy. I slipped through the window, landing softly on the wooden floor below. Every creak of the planks made my heart pound. I moved quickly, keeping to the shadows as I navigated the labyrinth of crates. The voices from earlier grew louder as I approached the back of the warehouse. I'm telling you, this time I've got the best hand, one voice said, rough and confident. That's what you said last round, and look where that got you, another retorted with a sharp laugh. Don't act so smug, Harlan. You were sweating bullets when I raised. Thought you were going to fold like a damn coward. Fold? You wish. I knew you were bluffing the whole time. Besides, the real fun is watching you lose your temper when you're down. Laughter echoed through the cavernous space. Another voice, slower and more deliberate, joined in. Keep it down, you idiots. If Dregger hears we're slacking off, we'll be on rat cleaning duty for a month. Relax, the first voice replied, the boss doesn't care as long as we keep the goods safe. Not like anyone's stupid enough to come poking around here. I crouched lower, straining to keep my breathing quiet. Their careless banter betrayed an air of overconfidence, but it also told me they weren't on high alert. That was good, for now. The office was a small, enclosed space at the far end of the building. A single lamp burned inside, casting flickering light over a cluttered desk full of booze and stacked parchment. And there, in the center of the mess, was the ledger. "Got you," I murmured, a flicker of triumph breaking through my fear. I reached for the door handle, only to find it locked. Of course, it couldn't be that simple. My fingers fumbled at the lock, and I cursed under my breath. Shit, I don't have time for this. The guards could walk in at any moment. The lock finally gave way with a soft click. I slipped inside, closing the door behind me. My hands moved quickly as I scanned the desk, grabbing the ledger and tucking it into my coat. But something else caught my eye, a letter, hastily scrawled and addressed to a name I recognized. A noble's name. My stomach tightened. This was bigger than I thought. Footsteps outside snapped me back to reality. Someone was coming. I blew out the lamp, plunging the room into darkness, and pressed myself against the wall. The door creaked open, and a figure stepped inside. I held my breath, my hand gripping the hilt of my knife. The man muttered something about misplaced keys, his voice gruff and irritated. He shuffled around for a moment, then left, the door clicking shut behind him. That was too close. I darted toward the window, ready to climb out the way I came in. But as I approached, I froze. A second guard was standing near the window, his silhouette barely visible in the dim light. I cursed under my breath. The way out was blocked. I needed a new plan. I darted back into the shadows, pressing myself against the wall. My heart pounded as I peered out, watching the guard's movements. He wasn't paying attention to me, he was too busy scanning the area, standing watch like he'd been trained to do. But the position he held was perfect for an ambush. I tightened my grip on the dagger, pushing aside hesitation. This wasn't the first time I'd had to kill, but it never got easier. My mind raced with fleeting thoughts of who this man might be, what kind of life he lived. But those thoughts didn't matter now. Survival did. Moving silently, I approached him from behind, each step calculated and deliberate. The faint sound of his breathing guided me as I closed the distance. In one fluid motion, I wrapped an arm around his mouth, pulling him back as my dagger plunged into the soft spot beneath his ribs. He let out a strangled gasp, his body convulsing before going limp in my grasp. I eased him to the ground, blood pooling beneath him as his life slipped away. The coppery scent of blood filled the air, mingling with the warehouse's stale odor. My hands trembled for a moment, but I forced myself to focus. There was no turning back now, had a ledger to deliver, and I was going to make it out of here alive. I turned, moving quickly toward meeting spot. Later at meeting spot. Rough night? Old man asked. I tossed the ledger at his feet. There, your precious book. Now, tell me how to get into the main square. The stranger picked up the ledger, his eyes scanning its contents. Impressive, he said. You're more resourceful than I thought. Save the compliments, I snapped. I held up my end of the deal. It's your turn. He smiled, a slow, deliberate smile that made my skin crawl. Patience, lone. The main square isn't just a place, it's a world of its own. And if you're serious about stepping into it, you'll need more than just courage. You'll need someone who knows its secrets. And that's you, I suppose? I asked, my voice dripping with skepticism. Perhaps, he said. This was only the beginning, and already, it was more than I bargained for. But I couldn't stop now. Not when I was so close. Fine, I said, what's next? Come, the old man said, his voice a little more urgent. Hop on the carriage. We are short on time. The patrol to the main square might switch any minute now. End of chapter. If you interested in my work, be sure to leave a like or a comment. For more chapters, be sure to subscribe.